How's it going? My name is Brent from Encore PPF and Tint, and today we have a 2015 Dodge Challenger here in the shop that we're going to be installing paint protection film on this bumper. This kit is cut out with core. I did make a couple adjustments to it. One, the customer wanted this to wrap up into the engine compartment, which the kit does not do, so I went ahead and extended that, which you'll see later in the video. I also cut out or eliminated these markers, side markers from the kit in the computer because there is so much stretch involved in this area as well as down here, but that has nothing to do with why I took these out. The reason I took these out is because there's so much stretch in this area in order to get this all these edges to line up that I really didn't want to have to line up something else. It's plenty difficult enough. Let's not add extra stuff in there to have to go around and to make sure is lining up perfectly. So delete it, install, cut out around it. It's the easiest way to go with all the stretching that's involved. Let's see, anything else? There is a seam down here, which I will show you how to trim one of these, but I think I'm going to do the other one by myself just because the camera does really get in the way. These are difficult to trim because it's so far down there. You'll see that later. And that's that. And then so you've got a piece here and a piece up here and a seam right here. So, and then there's also this center piece is the second piece, and there's a seam here and there. Terrific. Well, let's get started on this. And then I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but it's going to be loud here in the shop today, so we're not going to get any audio on this one. So I'm either going to do a voiceover or we're going to be listening to music. I'm going to try and just do a voiceover though eventually here. So hope you guys find this one helpful. All right, well, let's go ahead and get this piece of material laid onto the vehicle. I'm going to just speed on through this. I've shown this plenty of times in other videos. You could take a look at some of those if you want to see, you know, how exactly I get that off the wall and lay that onto the vehicle. Just trying to get this, you know, kind of lined up into place all the way across the bumper. And then we're going to go ahead and pull this back here. Make sure there's no pre-tacking. Well, then we'll put some tack solution in here, and this is going to be our first tack point. Is going to be coming down the back side of the bumper there, right up against the fender. So all the edge that lines up against the fender, I'm going to go ahead and tack down right now, and then tack down here across that top part right there. And then we're going to add some tack solution down here and stretch down and get this all tacked down into the wheel well area. So I'm just kind of trying to take a look here, see what kind of stretch I'm going to need, you know, what exactly needs to be tacked down, if everything's tacked down well enough. A little bit more tack in there, and then we'll squeegee this part back out. All right, so now that should be good and stuck down, and we can go ahead and start working our way away from that. It's important as we come across here that we continue to check for pre-tacking, as well as make sure that we're lining up correctly where we need to be. You can see I'm pointing there at that section, so I'm basically just saying that's an area we're going to be paying attention to right now to make sure as I stretch this that lines up correctly. So I'm going to hold this with one hand, and then I'll go ahead and we'll squeegee this out up to my hand. You can see that, you know, pretty much got out all those fingers that were around that bend there. And just good overlapping strokes. Make sure we're not leaving any moisture behind. You can also see that I run fairly tacky on my slip solution. I do have a video that goes over exactly how I make my slip solution and what kind of soap and how much soap is in it. We've got some fingers there on the top. I'm just pointing those out, as well as making sure that I'm pointing out to myself to mention that we need to make sure and stay pretty lined up across that top edge. You know, just the placement on the pattern is really important. But I do run pretty tacky, and that allows me to kind of pull that into place, squeegee it out, and then have most of that stuff stay down. Alright, so I'm lining this bottom up really well. And then we'll go ahead and again squeegee out to my hand. Okay, and I think this top part we're just going to go ahead and leave and let just hang out there. Because that's something that, because we're going to basically, you can see me squeegeeing out up there, and we're stopping on a body line. And so that's something that we can just let sit there, and we can pull back up to that body line later. But what we need to get is this bottom section here stretched into place. And I must say that this is probably the most difficult area for sure on this bumper. It's going to be in this area here. There's a lot of tension, but that material needs to get pushed down into there. And there's just some good little contours here and some recesses that make this part of the install just a little bit more difficult. And you'll see that, and if you do one of these, you'll know that. There's, you know, this is a tough space right down here. So there is a recess right there, and so what I'm basically trying to do is kind of stretch this material into place, and then we're going to get this to stick down where my finger's holding it down and make sure that we're, you know, running nicely along that bottom edge. And then we're going to need to get rid of this air pocket here. So you can see I put a lot of pressure on that with my thumb and held that for a while to make sure that that stayed down. And then I squeegeed everything else out around it. Alright, so now what I've done here with my left thumb is I've trapped all that air in there. And then I pushed out all the air so the air doesn't continue to come back in to that recess there. And then it's tough to get the squeegee in there and get a nice pass on that, so I'm going over this just a bunch of times with kind of different angles and try and holding the squeegee a little bit differently here and there to try and make sure that you don't leave any water, you know, you don't want to leave any moisture behind in that recess. A little bit more tack solution in here, and then we'll go ahead and get this pushed down to just over that edge, and then that will get us ready to lay that part into place. As long as we're pushed down to that edge, we can just let that sit and rest, and then we can get the rest of this laid down over here. And then we'll come back once this is laid down into place, and we'll go ahead and wrap into that fog light. Alright, so I got that stretched down, and then we'll get this squeegeed out. You just always want to be checking to make sure that you're rolling over the edges correctly. You don't want to be hanging over any edges, because then you're going to cause yourself extra work, because you're going to have to come back and trim things. It's a pretty small part here that's attaching to the bumper, so I'm going to go ahead and I went ahead and added some tack solution into that, and then we'll squeegee that back out. So I'm just checking the tension there, kind of see what we've got going. It obviously is what it is, so regardless of how much tension is in that area, this is going to need to get pushed down. So we're getting some tack solution in here now. And I'm just trying to kind of get an idea of how to tackle this. So I'm kind of holding that down a little bit, and then I'm just working my way around. And this is something that, especially when you get some tack solution in there, you want to just get this down as quickly as possible, and you don't want it to continue to pop back up. And that's why I'm holding it down with my other fingers there, because the more that pops up and the more time that you spend here trying to push this down, the more work marks that you're going to leave in the adhesive. And this material actually goes into there, and then there's like a flat part of the bumper next to the fog light. So you do have to be careful when you push this out that you get all that moisture out of that, basically that corner, because it goes in and then turns, and it's very easy to leave moisture behind in that, and then that will just dry into air pockets. And the problem with leaving something like the moisture in there that dries into air pockets is that then you're going to have to hit that with a needle, and there's a lot of tension in there, and so using a needle is something, or a syringe is something that you really don't want to have to do in an area like that, because you can cause the material to pull air in through that syringe hole and continue to pop back up. So now I'm just making sure that we've got this aligned correctly, and we've got this stretched into place, and that we're getting all the, as much coverage as we possibly can everywhere. I will come back later and we'll have to trim underneath here because there is a bit of overlap in the material. It's just the way that it turned out, and so we will be coming back and trimming that off. But for now, we'll just get some tack in there, let this start to set up, and move on to other things and come back and trim that later. I keep looking at these fingers that are just to the left of my hand. There we go. We need to get those down, and we don't have to wrap them all the way down and get them fully down, but we do need to get them down to the body line there. Otherwise, as those start to dry, they can leave distortions in the adhesive. And I'm just pulling up here, getting a little bit more slip solution in there so that we're not pre-tacking. And then we're going to go ahead now and pull all the rest of this bumper back and get rid of any pre-tacking. And then we'll go ahead and start stretching all of this into place, because at this point what we need to do is stretch over to the other side of that lower grill area, and just to underneath the headlights basically as well. So this stuff needs to get stretched over and into place before we start working our way over there in the center. Because if you just start working your way over from the right underneath the headlight to the left underneath the headlight, you may not have this positioned correctly, and it's incredibly important that all this stuff lines up, because look at all that stretching we need to do in order to get that to line up to the fender. There's quite a bit there. And now this did sit for a bit, and so what we've got here is a hard line to stretch from, which could leave a distortion in the adhesive when we stretched away from that spot. So what I'm doing is squeegeeing out an inch or so over into a new area, and that will give us a nice soft line to stretch from that hasn't been curing for a bit, and that will eliminate the possibility of us leaving any stretch marks right there as we pull away from that area, because we are going to have quite a bit of stretch. And basically there I'm just trying to make sure that I'm up to those body lines, and then there I'm showing you that how much we have to stretch over and what I'm going to be, the areas that I'm going to be really focusing on when I'm stretching that into place. All right, we'll get a little mist on there. Obviously I just pointed at it. It needs to go up a bit in order to get that stuff aligned correctly. And you can see, because I do run fairly tacky, that basically my hand being held in one spot for quite a while there did tack that material down on that side, and I was able to lift my hand up and off of there. If you're not able to do that, then you'd want to squeegee out just to the right of your hand in that area over there, so that you get something stuck down so that you're able to remove your hand, and then we could start working out here in the middle coming across. Now this bumper was just painted by a body shop, and obviously from the manufacturer it comes with those dimples in there. And so I was just using the harder part of the squeegee in order to get all the moisture out of those little recesses as much as I possibly could, so we don't have a bunch of air that's going to be trapped in there. All right, so we're going to go ahead and lift this up where my hand had been holding it in place and where it stuck down. And we're going to get some more stretch on it and make sure that we're really lined up into position here. We're going to need to wrap or stretch back there all the way to the fender. Kind of surprised I didn't put any, I don't think I put any tack in there. But you can see I'm just holding that in place, and so I'm putting some pressure on it, and we're getting that to start basically pre-tacking, and then I'll squeegee that out. Now the other thing that you could do is just put some tack in that edge, and then you wouldn't have to hold your hand there for so long. You would just squeegee it out and it should keep itself in place. And so while I'm taking that time to leave my hand there so that things start tacking down, I'm going to go ahead and just squeegee out other areas, and that'll also make sure that nothing moves once I remove my hand. So you can see there's a solid amount of stretch on this bumper. I'm just rechecking everything, making sure that I squeegeed everything out. I just signaled there that we're going to hold off on those fingers around that headlight, and we're going to get to work on this bottom section first. So again, we got lined up with the fender. Now we're going to stretch down to the bottom of the bumper here and make sure that we're lined up along the wheel well. Again, I didn't put any tack in there. There we go. It's like, how's that possibly going to stay down? There's a decent amount of stretch there. So much that my hand's slipping on the material. All right, so what I'm doing there with the towel is drying the material off, because then your hand is going to stick to the material much better and you can get a much better grip on the material. So go ahead and stretch that into place. You can see that I squeegeed it out, and then now I'm using my other hand to hold it in place, and then you could see with my other hand there I was jiggling the material around, and that was to break the material loose from any pre-tacking that I had caused with my right hand while I was squeegeeing that bottom corner into place. Because anywhere where you get some serious pre-tacking, you do have a possibility of leaving a distortion in the adhesive once you squeegee out there. All right, and I did signal that we need to stretch down right here. And I do have a little bit more of a difficult time with this side, as I recall from here while I'm watching it while I was editing it. I'm hanging over a little bit there, so I'm going to pull back up to the marker, and we'll go ahead and re-stretch this down into place. I don't want to be hanging over the bottom. It's tough, it's going to be tough to trim those little things off down in there. So we'll go ahead and re-stretch this into place and try this again. Oh, look at that. I don't know if you could see right there. I just walked away. Oh, this is great editing. All right, let's get this stretched into place again and get this squeegeed out. So now I'm paying attention, I'm paying better attention to the bottom edge as well as the wheel well area to make sure that I'm not going to be hanging over that bottom edge. No point in causing ourselves some extra work and causing us to have to trim areas that it's not necessary really. All right, so let's go ahead. We've got to get this bottom part tacked down here really well, and then we'll start stretching things into place and pushing out all the moisture around the fog light, just like we did on the other side. And I think this side I have a little bit tougher of a time getting some of this air out just right above my hands there. So I'm trying to get a decent stretch on it, make sure that I'm lining up with that bottom edge as well as possible. Must have had some pre-tacking there from pushing on it with my fingers, so I went ahead and lifted that back up. And then we'll push that down into place, and then I'll squeegee everything out down to my hand, and then we'll just continue to work our way all the way down, and bam, there we go. Nice and lined up on that bottom edge. I honestly don't know what's going on there, why I'm doing this a third time. That must not have been lined up as well as I thought, or it released a little bit and came back up. And so that's why I'm putting some tack in there this time, is because it didn't line up as well as I wanted it to. All right, so with that bottom tack down now, most of this water, the soapy water, is going to have to come out kind of to the side there. Yeah, so I'm going to have to pull that off to the side because I'm not able to go straight down with it because that's already tacked down. All right, so we've got this area out here that might have a little pre-tacking, so let's go ahead and get that lifted up. We'll go ahead and get some more slip solution in there, and then we'll go ahead and squeegee this area down once we make sure that we've got the correct alignment. So we need to line up well across the bottom. Oh, you know what? Really, we need to get this left part all the way down first before we put this other part down. That way we're able to bump them into each other or overlap if we have to down there underneath the fog light, but we need one side all the way down and stuck to the bumper before we start putting another side down to it. Gosh, I hope that made sense. It sounded confusing when I said it. All right, so we've got to go ahead and stretch down a little bit here. And at the same time I'm stretching down, I'm also stretching to the right. And then there were some little fingers there, so we get a little bit more tack in there, push those down. Make sure that all of this part is sealed down really well so that we're able to bring down the right side of that and bring those two pieces together. A little bit more tack. All right, I'm holding that with my thumb there to make sure that finger just doesn't continually pop back up. Might need some more tack in there. You know, using your fingers to hold things down is a great tool. Don't forget to use your other hand to hold stuff down, because if you just get something to stay stuck down in place for just a few extra seconds, chances are it's not going to pop back up. All right, so I've got that bottom stretched into place, and then we'll go ahead and squeegee out to my hand. Recheck that bottom edge, recheck rolling into that center grill, and then I'm kind of taking a look there to see how I'm lining up with the left piece that we just laid down. And I'm pretty sure I overlap again. We're going to trim the other side together, but we won't be trimming this side together. It's kind of tough to get in there with the camera, so we'll get one side though, so you know exactly how to get in there with a blade and trim that. And again, just make sure when you're stretching this into place and you're laying everything down that you're checking how far everything rolls over, and you're making sure to get everything really well lined up with the edges. All right, so I think it's gonna be time to get this air pocket on the left pushed out. And so you can see right there, basically by pushing down a little bit with one hand, I'm able to trap that air pocket in there, and then I can push it out with my other finger. Although I must say, I have a tough time on this side. It's just how it goes sometimes. It just continually wants to pop back up while I'm trying to squeegee it out. That's just a tough kind of recess there to get the squeegee in correctly to make sure that you're getting everything out of there. So I think this first time and maybe even a second time I add slip solution, and then I end up just going to tack solution because we need something underneath my finger where I'm holding it down that's going to help it to tack down much quicker so that it can't just pop back up and let the air travel back down into that recess. Because as soon as I hit my finger there, you can see that air pocket just travels right back down. Oh, well good, I only did it one more time with the slip solution. Now we'll get some tack in there, get some slip on the outside so that our squeegee will glide nicely across the material. And what a difference, huh? Just push that down with my finger. The air pocket is completely staying down and out of there right from the top. So, definitely you want to try different things while you're doing your install, and don't just keep, beating your head against the wall. Adding that tack in there was a really smart decision. All right, once again, I'm checking my tension there and seeing what, how that's going to line up inside there. And then we'll get some tack going here. And I believe what I'm going to do next then is get this finger. Oh, okay, well, we've got some water there on the bottom that needs to be brought up. Because basically what we want to be at this point is all the way around this, we want to be to that body line where it starts to dip in towards the fog light. So we're going to get the bottom here, and then I would believe that what I would do next would even be to get that top left area pushed down so that when we stretch this into place, everything is to that contour in the body line. All right, so we'll get a little tack in here, and then we'll probably do, just a minor swipe and hold there. Just over that edge. And then now we'll be ready to start wrapping that in. So you can see I kind of have a little bit of a finger there, and I kind of push it over on itself there. And what we need to do is kind of try and break that finger up a bit and take it up more towards the top. Because obviously as this material dives in there, it needs to stretch. And so, that stretch will help get rid of that finger. But we need it not to all be down in that one spot. And so you can see as I pushed it down and moved it up into the area where we're going to be pushing this down now. Let's get some tack solution in here so this goes down and stays down really quickly, so we get as little distortions, if any, in this adhesive as possible. Yeah, so it's best to use your other hand to kind of hold that material down a bit. These are fun. That's a really fun area. When you do one of these, you'll know that's a tough recess to get your squeegee into really well, and make sure that you're getting full contact and not squeegeeing out parts but leaving moisture behind. Because we have tack solution in there, it's hard to push out that moisture once you get everything around it tacked. And then you really start leaving distortions in the adhesive. And like I said, because that dives down in and then comes to like a flat part again right around the fog light, you got to make sure to get that recess there where it contours at the bottom pushed out really well. All right, I seemed happy with that, with the thumbs up. So that went fairly smoothly. Now we're going to get this whole top part lifted up to the body line, because if there is a distortion from lifting the material back up, it'll be on a body line and that'll hide it, so we don't have to worry about seeing a distortion. All right, so I got some tack solution in there. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up, because this is going to be, it's a relief cut and there will be a seam there. And so we need to get this really stuck down so that we can bump that next piece of material up against that area. And then just take your time on these contours, because it's very easy when you're rounding corners like that to be able to leave moisture underneath the material, because the squeegee, you know, you just want to make sure and get good even pressure with that squeegee and get everything pushed out. And then drying that edge out there like I'm doing right now will help that stuff stay stuck down. Although pretty quick here, we're going to add some moisture, but we're making sure that it's stuck down before we do that. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and work on this seam here. And so it's important at the end of these relief cuts, you see that little finger there, right where I keep running over it with my finger? We're going to need to put a little bit of tension up towards the headlight in order to make sure that there is no finger there, and that the finger transfers, it doesn't stay on the corner, that it goes out, if that makes sense. So it goes out to the right, up and to the right there a little bit. You don't want to leave those little fingers or have the material popping up at the end of a relief cut like that, because you're going to run into big trouble with those not wanting to push down. So at the end of the relief cut, if you just push the material seam together and you leave a finger at the end of the relief cut, it will continue to pop up and not want to stay down. So you do need to manage that material there correctly, so that you're not fighting it. Otherwise, you might have to come back and cut that material out. It's just something to pay attention to when you're seaming material together. All right, so I'm just working up the seam, and we want this seam as tight as possible, because this seam is right out in the open. And I mean, any seam really, you always want a really nice tight seam. But these areas here are just right out in the open on this bumper, and if you get a really good seam here and you bring the material together, the customer really won't even notice the seam. If you leave a gap there, that's just going to fill full of wax and dirt over time. You know, it's just going to be something that's going to be more and more noticeable over time. So just always want to get a really tight seam, and so that's what's most important right now, and then we'll get the rest of the stuff there just above my left hand pushed down. Because that finger is manageable, we can work with that finger as long as, but what's important is that we're getting a nice tight seam here. So I'm just continuously kind of pushing the piece of material that isn't down yet into the piece of material that is down, and making sure that we're just butted right up against that. I'm kind of working my finger over that area because it's overlapping just a tiny bit, and so just I'm working that down and getting those pieces to level out and flatten out right next to each other. So we've got a finger there, and so what we need to do is break that up as much as possible as we go back towards the headlight. Beautiful. Double checking all these body lines here to make sure that no moisture had come running down at all, and that there isn't anything in those edges or in those body lines. Double checking my seam, make sure that that's looking good. I think at this point we'll go over and do the other side, and then we'll work this whole middle out. And so first things first, again, we need to go ahead and get the first part completely laid down and stuck down so that we can bump into it with our seam. Now on this side, I don't know if you can notice or not, but I am higher on this side for whatever reason. Everything else seemed to line up pretty good, but I'm definitely, the seam is closer to being on top of that part of the bumper than it was on the other side. So we're actually going to end up with a little bit of material that's going to need to be tucked underneath that black plastic. And unfortunately, there's plenty of space for that, so we're not going to need to trim it. Not sure exactly how that happened. Obviously, I stretched it a little bit different on this side. But again, we want to get a nice tight seam here. So right there you can see how I'm pushing that finger away from the end of that relief cut. And that's to make sure that that end goes down and stays down really nicely. And then, you know, we can manage that finger as we continue to work towards the left there. So you see that little tiny thing. I don't know, it's hard to see that it's sticking up just the tiniest bit right there, right at the end of that seam. And we want to try and get rid of that as much as possible. And you can leave something tiny there because you will be able to work that out if it's really small. Get some tack in there and then get some pressure on it with my finger to make sure it is going to stay down. Otherwise, we would need to pull that back and make sure to get enough tension on it and get that finger away from that. We're just continuing to work our way over. Making sure to get a nice tight seam. And then you can see there that I am bumping into the black plastic, and then you'll eventually here I'll tuck that under. Some tack in there, and then I think right here is where I start pushing that underneath there. So I'm doing a swipe and hold there so it doesn't pop back up. And seam work is just, it's crucial for a really good install. You know, if you can get some really great seams, and customers don't mind having them then in the material. You know, if you're leaving big gaps and stuff, but, you know, it just doesn't look as well finished and polished. And obviously, you know, it takes quite a bit longer to get a really good seam, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, extremely important. So you can see there with my thumb that I've got that material bumped into the other material really well, and it's nice and tight, and so I'm holding it in place there so that it starts to stick down, so that when I do move my finger, the material doesn't move. A little bit more tack in there. We'll go ahead and squeegee out all the way to my thumb again, and then we'll just keep working our way up. All right, just double checking this seam. All right, now we'll get to work on this center section here. So we're just going to go ahead and lift this back up to one of the body lines. Make sure we don't have any pre-tacking. And then we'll start rolling this over and all the way back to the grill there. So you can see I'm starting plenty low there, just in case any water happened to migrate back down the bumper. We're starting plenty low and then wrapping that over and up into the grill. Maybe we might need some tack on that. Yep. Throw some tack in there, make sure that that edge, any little fingers that are popping up now should stay down. And I would think I'd even be drying this area out with my towel here once this is pushed down. Although that does look like it's staying down pretty good now. Oh, there we go. We're drying the edge out a little bit. And that'll also help make sure that that material doesn't pop back up. Having moisture in the edge will definitely be something that allows the material to pop back up. So if you get it dried out, it lessens the possibility of it popping back up. Once again, checking for any pre-tacking. And then we'll go ahead and roll this into the grill. Now it looks like I've got a little piece of some piece of contamination there. It's probably some kind of a bump. So, you know, a little piece of grit or something. And I went ahead and broke it loose. And I think I got it out with my finger, but I'm double checking there. And then just flooding it with moisture and then pushing all that moisture out and hoping that that piece of dirt went out with the moisture. Just really taking my time and making sure that the rounded edges there are completely squeegeed out. Now we'll push everything down back to the grill, and then we'll probably add some tack solution and just make sure that all that's staying down really well. There's quite a bit of moisture, quite a bit of soapy water that we use there, so I went ahead and just pulled that back a little bit and just made sure to really rinse that out so that we've got just plenty of tack solution in there and it's not diluted by the soapy water. Looks like I'm switching over to the black squeegee here, and this squeegee is a bit more rigid than the red one. So the red one contours a lot better because it's a lot more flexible. But this one, really, when you put some good pressure on it, it's pushing everything out. Just feeling that edge. Make sure I don't feel any ripples or anything in it. Any water bubbles. Alright, that's looking good. Now we'll start working down here. So again, I'm getting pulled up to a body line there. And then we'll go ahead and get some tack solution in here now, and we'll go ahead and roll this into this lower grill here. Alright, so I laid down the easier part there first, and then we'll go ahead and get this part that's going to require a little bit of stretching. And what I'll probably do, yep, is go ahead and push that down and then hold it in place with my thumb just to make sure it doesn't continue to pop up. Just a few seconds there with your finger, and that should help that to stay down in place. Great, and we'll get some more tack in there probably and finish working our way down and get all of this pushed down. It's kind of an interesting contour there, especially with that, I don't know, whatever the black plastic there is on the bottom, what they call that, but it's kind of in the way for getting your hand in there and getting your squeegee turned certain way. So it's kind of an interesting way you have to roll this around and into that grill. All right, now we'll do this same thing here to the other side. And then what? What's left after this? So we've got two more pieces still to install, and I'm sure I know that we're doing the bottom middle one there first, and then we'll get to that top one. So again, just getting all that pushed down, making sure everything's squeegeed out, holding that in place with my thumb. Got the camera freaking out a little bit here, going back and forth in between focused and not focused a little. I haven't been able to figure out why it does that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why it does that. I haven't been able to figure it out. It drives me crazy though when I'm editing, because I'm like, what are you doing? Why did you do that? There's like nothing going on. I don't know why it kind of spazzes out like that. Make sure you're getting good even pressure on those again, on those bends like that, so you're not leaving anything behind. All right, little finger there that's popping up. And now it's time to trim around these side markers. So I'm just going to go ahead and go all the way around. You can see, you know, it's great to be ambidextrous and be able to use both hands with the blade. And you just want to make sure when you're turning on a turn like that that you're moving the blade forward while you're making the turn. Because the more turn you make without moving the blade along in the cut, the more you're going to have jagged turns. Now we want to go ahead and make sure that when we're pulling this material off, that we're pulling it away from the rest of our pattern, so that if we do happen to get to an area that doesn't tear correctly, or an area that doesn't cut through deep enough, that it tears out into this side marker versus tearing up into our pattern. So just these little tears here, pulling away from our pattern. And then you'll see over here, of course, I'll start kind of pulling up on it. All right, we'll get some tack in here, and then we'll roll this little edge in and make sure it's all stuck down. All right, and I guess we'd need to go do that on the other side as well. So here I'm drying the edge out to make sure that it stays, you know, to help give it a good chance of staying stuck down. And drying out some of these edges here up along against the fender. And that will also just help it start to dry so that when we come back for the heat sealing process, it's nice and dry. All right, let's get around this marker light as well. So you can see I'm riding just right at the edge of the bumper there. Just almost right up against that marker light so that we don't get any gaps, you know, as little as possible. I want to keep that nice and tight. Again, as I'm going around, you can see when I'm making those turns that I'm also moving the blade forward while I'm turning. And that gives you the best possibility of getting a nice turn without it getting real jagged. So this one I start doing this little pinch method here so that I'm pulling the top and the bottom away from our pattern, away from our cut line. And you can actually see here where it starts to tear on the bottom. So I ran into a spot that wasn't quite maybe cut all the way through, or not cut all the way through, but didn't have as much good of a score line. Although when I bring it around this way, it comes off just fine. So but you know, it's important that you're pulling away from it so that just doesn't shoot out into your pattern, because I think none of us want to start over. I know I don't want to start over right now. All right, little tack in there, and we will tuck this into that marker light and get this all pushed down. And then of course we'll dry it out. So maybe now it's time for that lower middle part. Oh, nope. Goodness gracious. It's time to trim this. So what I'm doing here with the towel and my finger is that I'm running it right along that seam, back and forth, top to bottom. And now I've got a squeegee in there. And what I'm trying to do is get as much water out of that seam as possible, because the film is overlapping, and the more water that we can get out of there, the better, because then when we put a flashlight down in here, that edge or the seam where those two are overlapping will be silver instead of, if it's full of water, it's going to be darker, and that silver in that line allows us to really be able to see where we're going to need to cut in order to get a nice seam here. Now, unfortunately, it's incredibly difficult to get the blade in here, so there's no cutting all the way to the very bottom. So that bottom is really just going to be more, you'll see here, but we end up kind of just tearing that more than anything, because you just can't get the blade down in there. And maybe if you were using the sharper angle blades, which I don't use, you could get it further down. All right, so we've got that cut line there on the material, and we'll go ahead and tear this. And then it's tough with your fingers down in here to get this to tear all the way down off the bottom. And then now it curled up, so that's really hard to grab a hold of. All right, so now let's go. I think I take a squeegee and cram it down in there and try to get that tear to finish all the way to the bottom and off the edge, which it did. And then we'll go ahead and squeegee out that seam again and make sure there's no moisture in it. And then I run my finger along it to make sure that everything's nice and pushed down and we're not overhanging. And then we did get a good, nice cut there. And that seam down there, I wouldn't expect it to be amazing like the upper seams that we did earlier. That would be just impossible when you're when you're overlapping and then trimming, you never get as good of a seam. All right, so for this bottom part, we're going to go ahead and get this side here, the seam nice and tight. And the tack solution there was making it so that it was just too sticky, and I wasn't able to bump these into each other really well. And so I'm going to get this part pushed into place on the lower section and then the upper section, and then I'm going to hold that into place. And then that's going to start tacking down, and then I'm going to be able to squeegee that out. I'm trying to sneak a little tack in there if there is a little bit of an edge still sticking up, to where we can get a little bit of tack in there, and then when I squeegee it out, it should keep it stuck down. And then what we're going to do is jump over to the other side, get this lined up really well, and then we'll line all the way across and then squeegee out the center. You know, it's important that you tack down one side first and then go over to the other side and get that stretched into place. Because if you start over there on the right side and just start working your way over to the left, you don't know exactly how much stretch you do or don't need. So you could be overstretching the material, or you could be understretching it. So it's important that we get one side down, stretch all the way to the other side, and then work on the center section here. So while I'm holding that in place with a couple fingers to make sure that that seam starts to stick down, I'm starting to figure out my alignment here for this material all the way across, just to make sure that we're rolling over real nicely and that we're not bumping into that bottom edge also. And then we're going to I went ahead and squeegeed out along the face there. We'll get our seam squeegeed out. And we'll go over this one more time. So now on the face there of that bumper, we should be good and stuck down. There's obviously a little finger there that needs some tack solution. And now that that part is stuck down, we can get tack in the top here. And we can roll that into this lower grill area. I know I sound like a broken record, but just take your time on these things and make sure that you're getting all the moisture out of these bends here. You'll find that, as you start doing this more, that's the spots where it's just so incredibly easy to leave some moisture. And it's really hard to tell that it's there because it's on that bend. So it already, obviously if it's a nice flat area, it's going to be much easier to see a water pocket or a ripple in the material from a water pocket than it would be on a bend like that, because the bend already looks different. So the water doesn't stand out the same. So you leave that in there, and then you come in the next day or whatever, or you get done with your install, and it's air pockets left in it after that moisture dries out. You can see at the end there that I went ahead and ran the towel along the edges to dry those out so that starts curing. Now let's go ahead and put this top part in. So something just to note real quick about this is that, well, first off, let's just talk about what I'm doing right here. So we're going to get this seam lined up really good here on the right, and then we're going to do the same thing where we work our way we go over to the left, stretch it into place, and then we work the center out. I did, for this customer, adjust this pattern in the computer. That's why it's hanging over onto the fender as well as it's hanging into the engine compartment so much. I did adjust this so that we could wrap into the engine compartment. The kit in the computer is not going to do that, and that's because there's some rubber there that I then have to tuck this in behind, and it's a little bit of a headache. But he did specifically ask if I could do that because it didn't get done the last time that he had this bumper done, not by us, and he really didn't like that. So I went ahead and did this for him. So we'll have some trimming to do here and then some tucking once we get everything squeegeed out. So I'm getting rid of those fingers. by stretching the material towards the center, and then we'll go ahead and at least squeegee out here to my hand, and then we'll go get over onto the other side. So lifting all this up, making sure we don't have any pre-tacking. And now we'll work this seam. And once again, take your time on these seams. These seams need to be incredibly tight. If you know, the other thing is that if you can get a seam really tight, you can come back with the heat sealing process, put some heat on that, and you'll actually almost completely hide that seam. The material will actually self-heal itself back together on the top layer there with a little bit of heat, and then you have a seam that is not going to trap anything in it over time. You know, if you're leaving gaps, it's just gonna cause problems over time. All right, so I'm just kind of making sure that we're lined up good here because I've got a pretty good finger over there on the left. And so I just want to make sure that the material is lining up correctly. We're going to go ahead and break this loose. And now because I have stretch all the way across this material from right to left, what we're going to be able to do now is stretch towards the center again to get rid of these fingers. And all that extra stretch that was in the center that's really not necessary, some of that gets relieved by that now. So that's where that, you know, we needed to get rid of those fingers, and then all that center section that had a little bit of stretch in it, it just lost a little bit of its stretch, but that obviously it's not necessary out there because that's nice and flat. All right, so just continuing to check my front edge here because that back edge is hanging over. Everything has to be, I have to rely on that front edge in order to know that I'm lined up correctly now. So I've got a little bit here popping up that isn't quite staying down, so we're going to get some tack in there and push this down into that recess, and then we'll come back and trim that whole area off here in just a minute too. All right, so we're kind of just rounding over that edge, getting rid of that finger that was there, making sure that our seam is squeeged out really well. Now let's get the bulk of the rest of this out. So again, just double checking that front edge, make sure that we're lined up really well. And for your normal install, you're going to be able to use that back edge instead, because that would be actually more important. So you can see here, I've decided there's something I don't like. There might be a little bit of a distortion there in the adhesive. And so in order to correct that, what I'm going to go ahead and do is pop this up all the way to a body line. So we're going to come all the way over to this body line here and lift the material back up to that. And what that's going to do is if there is a distortion, it'll be on the body line, it'll be hidden. And so if you do, when you start popping the material up like that, if you can take it back to a body line, then you just, you eliminate the possibility of seeing any distortion from pulling it back up. And that's best case scenario. And like I was saying, if you're using the kit, I think it'd be more important to make sure that you're lined up on the back edge right next to the hood, because it's going to be super visible. All right, obviously I was getting some pre-tacking there, so I went ahead and lifted that back up, got some slip in there, and then we'll just continue to squeegee this out. So basically you can see I worked over towards the center, and then I go to the other side and work towards the center, and that's because, obviously we're squeegeed out and left and right. And so we bring everything to the middle, and then we can squeegee it out from there. Now I'm going to go ahead and call that slapping the material or slapping the edge out. And what's happening is the material's kind of hanging over the edge just a tiny bit right there. And so by slapping that out, I'm eliminating a lot of that moisture from the very edge, and that can start to dry. And then we'll go ahead and throw some tack solution in here. So I was really obviously at this point just removing all of the soapy water that I could, and then we'll get some tack solution in there, and we'll go ahead and roll this, make sure that this edge is completely squeegeed out. Now by doing that long squeegee there and that long pass, I did bunch the material up a little bit right there, and that's why I lifted that back up and pushed it out, because we don't want to create any fingers. And so now you can see on this part, I'm doing like little manageable swipes and then lifting up and then continuing again to make a little pass and then lifting up. Whereas I did a long pass like that on the other side, and that just caused me to bunch the material up. So I learned from the one side not to do that. Now we're wrapping or rolling under just a tiny bit, and then we're going to dry that whole edge out. And now that that's all dried out, I can also make sure and be checking for water pockets or anything that could have been left behind there. All right, so now it's time to trim this, and this is a whole thing that you're not going to have to do normally. I mean, I would figure that people almost never do this. Just a special request. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this part off, and then we will trim in the engine compartment once I figure out how much overhang we can have that we can tuck in behind that piece of rubber. I did look at removing that piece of rubber that we're going to be tucking in behind, but it is put in with rivets, and I didn't have any of those rivets in stock, and so I just went ahead and left it. And then we'll go ahead and just have to trim the material and then tuck it in, versus just removing that piece of rubber and wrapping around and then reinstalling it. Fortunately, you can kind of tug back on it or pull back on that rubber a bit and get this material to tuck in there nicely. So right here, what I'm doing is trying to figure out how far down before I hit the rivets. So how much material can I leave hanging over and not run into those rivets? And then we'll go ahead and cut off that amount and leave some hanging over at the same amount all the way across. So you can see there, with my left hand, I'm pulling away from the blade, so I'm pulling out and away, so back and in towards the engine compartment a bit with that hand. And what that does is that helps keep tension on that right where the blade is going through the material, so that we get a nice even straight cut and it doesn't get real jagged. If that material starts to bunch up because you don't put the tension on it, you're going to end up with a jagged cut there. And it will be hidden, so I guess it wouldn't really matter, but you could make a mess. And that's good practice anyway, because every time I'm trimming around the edges around the hood or any edge that's going to get wrapped, I'm always using that tug on the material in order to make sure that I'm getting a nice smooth edge and nothing jagged. Let's get ourselves a new blade here, and we'll go ahead and trim this part off. So sometimes when I stick the knife or the blade onto the material and I start to drag it across just a little bit, you can tell that it starts just kind of skating across the material. Almost feels like it's a butter knife. And it doesn't get a bite, so you don't feel any resistance into the material. And that's when you're going to need a new blade for sure. Because otherwise you have to use more pressure in order to cut down in, and then you're cutting paint. So just, you just get yourself a new blade and get a little bit of bite into that material. All right, so we're drying this edge out. Now we'll go ahead and get some tack solution in this, and we'll roll this in back behind that rubber, or in between the rubber and the bumper there. So we want to get everything squeegeed off the face first, make sure that nothing traveled back onto the face of the bumper, and we're going to go ahead and pull back on that piece of rubber and tuck this in now. I mean, I remember thinking, oh, this is a little bit of a headache. And then, actually, to be honest, I did cut this out incorrectly the first time and had to recut out this whole big old piece. I was super disappointed in myself. It's like, oh, you dummy, you dummy. I cut out the one, just the stock, you know, the kit one that I didn't extend, and then had to go back and extend it and recut this piece out. I mean, imagine that waste. That's just so much waste. I was so irritated with myself. It's like, that's really stupid. Nice going, Brent. So it pulls back obviously a lot easier in the areas in between the rivets, and then as you get closer to the rivets, you got to give it a little bit more force in order to get that material, enough space for that material to tuck in. So we'll just continue to roll this in, making sure that we're getting, that we're, when we're going over this bend, that we're getting good pressure on it so that we're not leaving any moisture again on that edge. I know I say that all the time, but really it's important. It's so easy to do. Just want to make, just get a good technique for rolling those in. So we're basically just chomping this down. And then I think I'm going to do a slide chomp here. We'll see. Nope. I thought I stuck the squeegee in there one more time and went across the back. Maybe I do that later when we're doing the heat sealing process. Alright, so hopefully the voiceover on this video went well. A lot of noise in here today, a lot of things going on, so I wasn't able to record the audio while I was doing the install, but I definitely wanted to get a video of this and get this up on the channel because I know this is a challenging bumper. and it is a challenging bumper. These areas, as well as all the stretch required in order to get rid of the fingers in this area, obviously I did remove these from the kit so that I could cut those by hand, because that's just one more thing to try to stretch into place and get a good alignment on. No thank you. There's already so much going on here with this bumper. Alright, so the only thing that's left to do on this bumper is going to be wait for it to dry and then heat seal these edges. So anyway, appreciate you guys taking a look at this. If you found something helpful, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start heat sealing this now. And you basically just want to pick an area to start and work your way around. And it's, that's just, you want to be real methodical about the heat sealing process so that you don't miss anything. And then every time you've got a seam like that, you want to go with the seam. You don't want to work against the seam. I told you to be real methodical about it, and then I jump around here. Look at me jumping around quite a bit, actually. Well, I'm sure I'll still get everything. I'm not sure exactly why I chose to kind of jump around like this, but you can see there I've got that finger pop back up, so we didn't get that split up enough. and the finger is just too much in one spot. So I went ahead and grabbed a pick tool there. I'm going to reach underneath the material and lift this up, and then we're going to break this finger up. So we're going to lift up to the left of it and to the right of it, and then we're going to push this back down. You can't just, if the finger pops up like that, you can't just keep pushing it down unless it's a really small finger, but right there is not going to be really small. There's going to be a lot of finger in that, and that's why it kept popping back up. And so by lifting that up and spreading that finger out along that whole edge, instead of having it just be in that one little spot, it gives it a much better possibility of staying down over time. All right, so we're just going to heat this up. So I usually run the heat gun somewhere between usually like 650 and 750 degrees. And we're going to heat this edge up and then run over it with our finger and get some pressure on that edge. And this heat sealing process is crucial for paint protection film. It's really pretty much the last step of the install, but it's incredibly important, and it's something you don't want to skip, because this is what's really going to help those edges stay stuck down so that you really eliminate or decrease your failures. Oh wow, I'm having a hard time saying that word. The failures, there we go, of edges popping back up, where you end up then just getting them, they end up filling with dirt. Because obviously that edge pops up, it's going to have adhesive, and that adhesive, then just the dirt gets stuck to it and it just looks terrible. But if you put some heat on there, push these edges down, you almost eliminate that problem. And I mean almost completely eliminate the problem. So it's very rare. I mean, my work will come back many years later and all the edges are looking fantastic, and that's because I spend ample time making sure that I heat seal every single edge all the way around. It is definitely a tedious process, but it's necessary. So you can see I'm kind of working my hand there back and forth as we move along this. And that's just to make sure that I don't bunch up any edges. Because if an edge happens to be popped up just a little bit and you put some heat on it and then run over it in a long run with your finger, you can really bunch that edge up and fold it over on itself. And then there's really no way to fix that. You're going to end up needing to trim that off. So by going back and forth like that with your finger, it really eliminates the possibility of bunching that material up if it was, happened to be popped up a little bit in an area. All right, so now we're working along the bottom edge. Oh, no, we're not. The top edge of the bottom part. There's some water in there you could see still, so I'm spending some extra time there making sure that we're getting the heat seal correct. I think in a couple of the spots there was some water, and then when I went over with my glove I dried that water out. There goes my wife walking through the shot. This vehicle was brought in and then has to go home on the same day. So a lot of times I'll let this stuff, like I'll put the bumper on and then I'll go work on other parts, and then the car will sit overnight, and then when I come in the next morning I'll go ahead and start, I'll heat seal everything from the day before, But in this circumstance here, I didn't have that availability because these people drove, I think it was about an hour and a half to 2 hours in order to bring this vehicle to us to have the paint protection film done. And so it needed to all get done in one day. So, and we installed it, and then just immediately, almost immediately, it needed to be heat sealed so it could go home. All right, so again, with those seams like that, you want to work with the seam and not against it. Now, when you're heating these edges up, if you happen to notice that your glove stops sliding really well across the material, then a lot of times what that means, or what that means exactly, is that you've gotten the material pretty warm. And so you'll want to get the heat gun away from the material and let it cool down. You can definitely overheat the material, although it's not a real common problem. But if you do notice as you move your finger across that it's feeling more sticky on the material, not gliding real nicely, that means you are getting the material too hot. So you'll need to get the heat gun away and either turn it down and move at the same speed, or you'll need to move the heat gun faster so that you're not heating the material up so much. Obviously, we're having a conversation. I don't know what we're talking about. Oh, this is making for a great video, though. Oh, goodness. Conversation you guys can't hear. That's basically how this whole day was going, though, with the recording of this video. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to record this video and do the audio without doing a voiceover. And the voiceover, I mean, if you've watched many videos on the channel, you'll know that I don't do this a lot because it's a lot of work. I've got to do all the same editing, and then I have to come back and re-watch this whole video and, obviously do the commentary on it. And it adds me watching the whole video like one more extra time. So that's an extra, for this video, it's an extra hour and a half of editing. So I definitely prefer to talk while I'm doing the install. All right, so I'm checking my seams here and getting those pushed down. Now, if you did have a little finger popping up in the where the seam ends, the spot where I was talking about, you don't want to have the extra material bunched up. What you would want to do is push that down first and then put some heat on it. You don't want to put heat on the material when it's popped up, especially in those little areas, because it's just going to pinch over on itself. And then you can see there that I'm working, making sure to work that area down really well, even with some extra pressure there with the Bondo card. And that's really going to help get that seam pushed down, because it's really nice and tight. And so we're trying to make sure that we don't have any silver in that seam at all. And that Bondo card will really help with that little bit of a hard edge. But you have to be careful, though. You put too much pressure on that and you're going to bunch the material up. All right, so we're going to just heat this up and kind of roll that little bit of edge that's hanging over to the underneath. More conversation for you guys to not hear. And you can see here that I'm just taking this little by little. Otherwise, what you would want to do is you would want to get this whole edge pushed down with your finger first, and then come back and put heat on it. The problem when this material is hanging off the edge a little bit like that, and it's not actually stuck to the bumper, is that those areas where it's not stuck to the bumper take all the heat. An area that is stuck to the bumper, or an edge that is stuck to the bumper, when you put heat on it, it's able to transfer some of that heat to the bumper. And so the areas that are popped up absorb the heat differently, and they get very malleable, and then it's incredibly easy to push those edges, bunch them up, and then create a real jagged edge that you're going to have to come back and trim off. So we're just taking this in real small, manageable areas. I mean, actually, this bumper, it came out amazing. The customer was just blown away. They had paint protection film on this bumper before, and then they'd hit something, had the whole bumper replaced and painted, and this install, they were just so happy with it, which was just great to see. And it was awesome because obviously it had been, like I said, it had been done before, so they knew the difference between the install that we did here today and what they had before. He said that below the headlights there was big gaps in those in the relief cut area, and so they were just ecstatic with this install. So we got some really nice tight seams. So usually when I push like that with the hard card there out in the middle of the material like that, that wasn't really on the edge so much. I probably had just a tiny bit of silvering, and so I was able to just push that down, heat that up a little bit, and push that down with the Bondo card. I do have a whole video that goes over silvering and how to kind of correct it as much as it's correctable. So take a look at that if you want some information on fixing silvering and how to hide it. All right, so this edge rolls just the tiniest bit, so I'm heating that up and pushing it down. Working with that seam a little bit there again. And then I'm pretty sure I come back with a Bondo card here, and we're gonna go over this part that's tucked in here behind the rubber and give it one more push down. And we're just about wrapped up here with this bumper, so we're getting real close. It's got just like, I don't know, barely even a minute left. So, I really appreciate it. If you guys have made it to this point in the video, I really appreciate you guys watching these videos. It really means a lot to me, and it's definitely obviously helpful for the channel. And you can see I'm just tucking this in and then making sure that we've got everything pushed down back there. And also, if there's a little bit of moisture in there, this side of the Bondo card will soak up that moisture. But definitely appreciate you guys watching these videos and interacting in the comments and whatnot. It definitely helps out with the channel, and it's nice interacting with you guys. That's that.